In order to venture further into this day's compulsive attempt to order the world and shoehorn it into words, I've applied a pomegranate beeswax lip balm with natural beetroot color to my lips. Any chapstick works, but why not juice it up with honeybees and carmine? No one cares. Anything can happen when the weather blows emotional. High winds and sudden drops in barometric pressure stir old vocabularies out of dust, and certain words like trapdoors swing wide open, fly off, ripped from hinges by F4 tornadoes, leave me crouched down in a howling cellar corner, promising the gods of screech and shrapnel anything they want to make it stop. In times like these, I reach back into my store of recollections for a green idea that conjures up July's feathered grasses brushing childhood's fingertips, the air pungent with each meadow mint crushed step. And there, round the next thought's corner, is my mother in her kitchen, sunlit as she was when I was 10. Why contemplate the present when the past is right there, ready to be tarted up to suit the mood? Sure, the lip balm helps with chapping, but it mostly makes me lick my lips and feel the edges of the words that tell a spell. The one that sends me back to days and doorways where I start and never end before what happened happened. Everyone alive and young, soft lipped, tasting grains of salt and sugar from each other's unscarred skin. Nostalgia, a poem from our guest tonight's book, How to Wear This Body. Good evening. My name is Charles Carr, and welcome to Philly Loves Poetry, a collaboration between the Moonstone Art Center of Philadelphia and PhillyCam. The focus of our program is to give our viewers the experience of the rich culture of poetry in the city of Philadelphia and the surrounding area. So tonight we have a very beloved and remarkable poet, and I mentioned her name because from the poem I read at the introduction, Hayden Saunier. Hayden's most recent collection, A Cartography of Home, was published in 2021 by Terrapin Books. In addition, Hayden has 4 other published poetry books, How to Wear This Body, also published by Terrapin Books in 2017, Say Luck, published by Big Pencil Press in 2013, Field Trip to the Underworld, published by Seven Kitchens Press in 2012, Tips for Domestic Travel, published by Black Lawrence Press in 2009. Hayden also has a chapbook, Field Trip to the Underworld, published by Seven Kitchens Press in 2015. Hayden's work has been awarded the Pablo Neruda Prize, Rattle Poetry Prize, the Gale Poetry Award, the Keystone Award, and nominated for over 12 Pushcart Prizes. Hayden is an actor with extensive theater credits as well as appearance in Mindhunter, House of Cards, one of my favorite series, Outsiders, Do No Harm. And as the voice of a broken down stove for IKEA, Hayden is the founder and director of No River Twice, an interactive and audience-driven poetry reading performance group based in Philadelphia. You can find Hayden online at www.haydensaunier.com. I'll say that again, www.haydensaunier.com. So welcome to our special guest, Hayden. It's really great to have you finally. And I want to thank you straight away for sending me your 4 books of poems, which all 4 of which I've read, and all 4 of which I enjoyed immensely. 2 of which I reread, and I'll probably reread the others. And The one thing that I was saying to myself as I was reading, among other things, was that I keep thinking of people, friends of mine, who, when I mention I'm a poet or poetry, they say, Charles, yeah, poetry's all right, but I don't get it. But I would say to anyone reading your poems and reading your books of poems, people would definitely get it because the word accessible is on my tongue when I think of your books, is that people really can connect to your poems because you have this great ability to talk about the ordinary objects, the ordinary things, the ordinary experiences that one has in their life, and to make them very special and really connect them. But you also connect, not only to this world that you've created, but you connect to people because when people read those, they say, "Yeah, that's me," or I've had that experience. And when I was reading your books and I was making my notes, about all these so many interesting objects that you have created poems from. It's just fascinating. For example, I'll just give a few of them. There's one poem which I just think is glorious, is that you create a poem based on the what I'll call the hold harmless clause on the back of a train ticket. And but you play with the word fair and you play with the word fate interchangeably. You also have one about an abandoned chair that you've identified on the roadside, which in the poem, to me, becomes almost like a set for a play. Mm-hmm. The experience of bias in a mini market. There's one wonderful crown sonnet that you create in, it's really the image of looking back through the rearview mirror at I guess a former boyfriend of yours, and that you're leaving. Uh, Another fascinating an observation sort of couple sitting in front of you at a conference, and the detail in that is just amazing. The sound of rain, locks, your customer service experience on the phone, the menace of a turkey vulture on your barn roof, house centipedes, and so much more. Um, so I've said so much, but I pose to you, how do you go about this? It's just fascinating how you create out of things that we don't really pay attention to so much, like you say, the back of a ticket on a train, or furniture left discarded on a highway, but it sticks with you, and you create something out of it.
Well, I think that's what it is. Well, first, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here and to be able to just have a conversation like this. I think I mean, I find ideas for poetry out of all kinds of different things. Sometimes it's a rhythm, sometimes it's an image, sometimes it's an experience, or I'm just so angry about something that I divert myself in a different way. You mentioned the one about the roadside chairs. That's just classic theater business, because you look out and you see one of these crazy leather, some leather chair that somebody has put out, and you think, what happened there? I just want to find out. It's the way I get curious. I wonder what happened there. Is somebody getting divorced? Did something happen? Why is this chair on the side of the road? Did somebody finally say, to hell with it, I don't want that? But that one looked like you could have been the king. And so that was my little fantasy about that. So I just, something sticks with me for the most part. And if it's sticking with me, then I try to take a moment to pursue it and see where it leads.
I think the other thing, there's, you use so many different approaches stylistically to your poems. You use couplets, but your poems tend to be brief and very compact. I mean, I did mention the Crown Sonnet; it's in 8 parts, and there's a couple of other that have parts, but they really are interlocks, and they really make sense. So, I mean, does the style that you pick, you use a lot of couplets, and the way you use couplets I really like because they create a certain pace in reading a poem. At an end, and then it has a beginning and the next line, how it's tied together. But it allows the reader to kind of slow down a bit and almost like eat,
Mhm.
really digest the poem, a much better. But so I was very interested in the styles that you use in your books.
Well, I think I follow the line um a lot, and the reason I use couplets is because I think for me I can see the line clearly with there's if there's space on top and there's space on the bottom. Somehow I just see the line more clearly that way, and I do use them all that a lot. Sometimes I will write. I'm like looking at something that is like a single like this, and if it's really thick and dense, I feel like I have to break it somehow because it's easier to read. It's easier to see the line. So I use a variety of different kind of ways to break it. Although most of my poems are really very narrative, so they really almost
Hmm.
belong in a narrative kind of chunk. But I want people to hear the music or the language or see the images in a clear way, and that's I think one of the reasons why I use that.
Well, it's very successful. It seems that the style that you pick for the poem, tends to really fit the poem, and I think that
I
that's
hope
really a great skill. There are some poets, I mean, they just stick to, and that's fine. They stick to a certain style. They might do couplets, they might do tercets or quatrains or whatever, and that's their style. But I really enjoyed uh, the variety. And I think that the reader also gets a chance to understand poetry comes out in different ways and can be communicated in different ways. The other thing that fascinated me, and I think one could even hear it in the poem that I've read, is your infatuation with sound.
mm.
And I mean, in the poem I read, just in, so to tell a spell, days and doorways, and I mean, there's others in that poem that uh, are wonderful. And as poetry, I mean, a lot of people who say they really like poetry, they really like the rhymes. Okay, they're kind of by tradition, but you create these internal rhymes that are just wonderful. But and I think we talked about this. Is that a function? I mean, you're an actor, and words and sounding and sounding out your dialogue, etc. Does that come into play here? The way you.
Completely and totally. There's like nothing as an actor, there's nothing better than having like, of course it's Shakespeare, but having these really beautiful words that are conveying everything at the same time. So uh, I love the sound of words. And when I'm writing, I'm always speaking out loud. I am always reading it out loud in order to hear the rhythm of it and hear the sound of it, and find the places where I trip myself up. There are a couple of poems that I've written that don't read aloud well, and it kind of bothers me, but that's okay. Some of them are better on the page, uh, but I really am very, very fond of the language in the mouth and how it feels and what it does to your body when you read something aloud. All those sounds are in your body. They're in your head. They're in your chest, and it brings up a whole lot more. We were talking earlier about how we're doing so much virtually now, and which is wonderful. But when you're in a room with somebody else, you're getting all this information from sound and that's just like it's like reading a poem, if you don't read it out loud, if you don't hear it in your mouth, if you don't hear it in your bones, you're missing a piece of it.
Yeah, poems. I see a poem and I want to read it, but I want to read it out loud
Yeah.
to myself. And really, it's almost like somebody humming during a song, uh,
Hmm.
or the lyrics, because there is a great music here to your poetry and a rhythm here, and I mean that I found that very fascinating. I found myself in many cases actually just stopping and reading a poem aloud, and it's very enjoyable. I can't say I do that all the time, but uh, your poems tend to tease one to want to do that. And like the
Oh,
way
that's
I picked
cool.
out this one, nostalgia, which has so many elements in it, that uh, that I, in a way, when I think of some of the poems I've read about you going back and looking back and creating that past that you have. But the way you're describing it here is that it's so enjoyable. You mean there's a lot of joy in what you're talking about your past.
Right. Right. Well, and I think that happens in all of these moments. I mean, when I think that's part of the kind of wonderful thing about every day. You walk out, and even though no matter what you encounter, so many different things happen. It's what's happening in the moment, and then it's all the reverberations that happen in your own mind or all around you. And I think the way that all expands is part of what I love about writing poetry, that you can't really do in any other way, but you can do it really concisely on a page. Um, and you don't need to have that lights and sets and, all the other things, but
Right.
you get to conjure that world.
And I know I mentioned this before when we were talking prior to the program. Is your most recent book, A Cartography of Home. And on the cover, there is, and I'll just hold it up, but people haven't seen it up close up. It's a nest. And and I said to myself, and I kept looking at it, and I said, well, this is like a great image, like a metaphor for your poetry. Not only this book, but for others in the way, I mean, this is woven together. It looks, I guess, haphazard, but it's not. There's different pieces of everything. I think you told me you actually made this nest yourself, and then you photograph. I think it's a great image on a book. But um, can you talk about that? I mean, that the selection of that, and a lot of people select images for their books for a reason, as a symbol of what is to follow in the body of the book.
Right. Well, this I didn't this was a nest I found on the farm.
Okay.
And but then I added to it, but the nest had in it pieces of like of plastic bag, and then baling twine, and all these other little odd things that this bird, and I don't know what bird it was, had woven through it. The way, and yeah, it is a perfect metaphor, I thought, for the way we make our home, that regardless of what we think we're making it out of, we make it out of all these little pieces of experience, I suppose, or at least for me. And then I took in this one, I took some maps, and cut strands of maps, strips of maps, and I wove that through it, because of the concept of this book was really about things about home and making home and inhabitation and our life here in like small circles, beginning from like the home nest to throughout out to the greater earth, or so that became a great metaphor for it. And luckily the wind knocked a bird's nest down in my
Mm.
path.
Well,
So
So in a collection like this, in this book, is this something that, I'm not saying that you had the title all worked out in advance, but is this collection is you put together within a certain time frame, and that's representative of it, and or you say to yourself, I'm really trying to create this with these poems
Right.
in this book. When you talk about a cartography, um, can you explain that, a, the use of the title, and how the book itself, your poems, follow from that?
Well, I wish I were one of those poets. I wish I were clever enough to have a concept and then begin to write and be so inspired that I can begin to write series and series of poems around a particular concept. Uh, I find that I start writing and then I begin to like gather some poems together and see what they seem to be making themselves, because I mean, you talk about, I do kind of write from whatever is strikes me around me. So this particular collection pretty much was gathered around I started collecting poems in the year and a half before we got shut down. And then it was like, well, I think this is my time to put this together. So,
Uh,
um, and then once it began to kind of, I keep making this because it's almost as gets a gravitational force is what I kind of feel like. Um, a book begins to get its own gravitational force around it. And once I began to understand that, then there were some poems that I could say, oh, this makes sense, or that makes sense, or I could go back into my notes and find poems or half poems or incomplete poems that would make sense if I moved them in a certain way. So once I kind of have the center, then other things, then I can begin to work around it. So that's what this became. And never have I titled a book, a manuscript, the title that it gets by the end. All the publisher says, not that title.
okay.
Gotta change that. But so that's you have a working title that you work from, and then you get something that's better.
Well, I think book titles also draw you to the book of poems, and not all do. Images on book covers draw one to the cover, just how it's, set up. Whoever does the setting up of the cover,
Mhm.
it's strange. I mean, the way you look at a book of poems, and you might not know who the author is, but you say, that, boy, I really dig that title, and I like that image. And you
Right.
pick it up and you start paging through it. And, going back to the nest, and there's so much in your work about the natural world,
Mhm.
and that you really you are very connected to the natural world, and you seem to be really in control of, like, your, I won't say control, but your complete pleasure in being in the natural world, and using that, that as a platform in your poetry. I'm not saying your books are all about the environment and about living on a farm. They're not. But when you go into that, you really have a great authority in when you create your poems about the natural world. Where does that come from?
Well, I grew up. uh, I mean, we had a little bit of a talk about this. I grew up in kind of a small town, but roving around the country as a kid, and I now live on a farm up in kind of Upper Bucks. But I love the city. I love them both. But I'm comfortable, and I walk every day, morning and evening. Um, you walk these fields and forests, and uh, you. I think that's my ease with it. Um, I'm not at, and I've come to. I was just struggling with a poem yesterday. I've you're always struggling with the fact that it's not just pretty. I mean, it's pretty rough sometimes,
Uh-huh.
and the natural world is very rough. So, but it's that mix of creation and destruction and creation and destruction, and I think that that's true in everything. If anything that, in terms of my work, that I want to try to communicate, it's that there's no single story. There's 1,000 different stories to every single scenario. And the saddest situation is also hilarious. It's all, packed in one. But I think the benefit of taking walks, and whether I'm in the city or I'm in the country, walking every day is gives you the greatest insight into everything. It's
Mm-hmm.
also rhythmically the best thing for
Yeah.
poetry, I think.
Yeah. And you bring an order to it. You bring an order within a poem to this chaos that you're talking about, to this uncontrolled, force of nature. Uh, for the reader, you bring, some a great degree of order and an understanding of things in nature, and that's very powerful, because books of poetry are very beautiful, but also books of poetry can be great information to people that really don't get a connection to nature, and that people can be driven, to appreciate the environment and appreciate nature and the mystery of it, but also very definitely, with what we're living through with the perishing environment and the perishing, natural world.
Well, you said a word that's very important to me, which is connecting. I mean, I think that's what all the arts do at their best, is that they connect us to each other in ways that are unexpected, or we connect to an experience that we otherwise would never have been able to kind of get inside. And I think that's, you get to live a lot of different lives, through whether you're reading poetry or reading fiction or doing plays or looking at, paintings. And I think that's the point, is that it is to build the empathy that you can by connecting as much
Yeah,
as you can.
yeah. You we're, I guess, close to time when you can begin to read your poem. But the one thing that there was a epigraph in one of your poems. I guess it's in your second book, and by um, the wife of William de Kooning.
Yeah.
And I don't have the exact quote, but it's essentially, the fascination in how you find things in life. It's almost like how one stumbles on them, and unaware. And I feel this is sometimes, also I see it. I said this is a great epigraph for the poem, but a great epigraph for your poetry, of how you find things in places that people say, well, geez, I'm not paying attention. I wouldn't find something there.
Right, right. Now, I think that's the one that happens in the parking lot. I can't remember. I'll try to I'll come across it in a minute. I thought I had it marked. Yeah, yeah. That's a poem. I didn't have it marked, but I'll read it, called "Oceanic Moment Outside a Discount Superstore." I don't know if anybody else has done this. I got into the wrong car.
Uh-huh. Wow.
I got I got into somebody else's car, which looked just like my car, and had a moment, got a poem out of it. So
Yep. Now, before we switch to the one of the last ones, it's a fascinating poem. It's your awareness of bias at a mini market,
oh,
and
right.
the way you describe that, your honesty about it, and I can you just talk a moment about that one poem, because I found it very fascinating and so authentic, uh, you know, poem that talk about this is my awareness of bias in what in an exchange, I guess with a clerk or whatever. You were with a friend at a mini market, and I
Yeah.
guess she was looking for
She was,
organic
yeah,
organic food
something
in a mini market.
absurd. And yeah, that was kind of just the moment. I was embarrassed and was like, oh my God, she's just the worst, sometimes. And the whole idea that suddenly we the bias was, I was trying to say, no, 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 we're not who you think we are. But in fact, we were exactly
Uh-huh.
who this who the mini market clerk thought
Yeah.
we were. It was like, that's okay, you're right. And
Yeah.
eventually I got her to crack a smile, because it was like,
Great.
I love those are just human moments that I love the most on the street, in situations when you catch someone's eye and you have a real moment of honesty about whatever's going on around you or yourself. But it does require that we stop pretending a little bit ourselves, that
Right.
we're all together. We're that, so
Well, we're at that point, and where we would really love to hear you read your poems now. And I really appreciate the discussion of all these things. I could go on for another half hour in this program. I think there's so much to talk about your poems, but really, people want to listen to your poems. So the floor is yours. The stage is yours.
well, thank you. And I pulled some out that I will read, but if there's anything that you want to say or remark as in between them, I'll try to set them up a little bit. And I'm kind of reading all over the place.
Okay.
So I'm reading from all of the books and a couple of new ones. And we'll just see how it goes. But I'm going to start with a poem I like to start with, just because it's about the first poems that one hears. So I tend to like to read it right at the top. And it's the title poem from the collection called Say Luck. So it's called Say Luck. Since you are alive and have leisure enough to hear poems, I'd say luck has entered your life more than once, unless this is the first poem you've heard. If it is, well, I'm sorry, but still you're alive. And that involves luck and her trusty companion's split-second timing. Remember those movies in health class. Remember the odds for each egg, each spermatozoan. This morning, I woke determined to write a poem about love. In my dream, I'd crossed over a bridge, like the bridge by a slow-moving river where my boyfriend from high school and I used to park. I wanted to slide slowly down the slick naugahyde seats of that car. Writing does that. It takes you back, makes you look odd things up, like how to spell naugahyde. And the first poem everyone reads should be about love, not luck. And not trees. I mean, no offense to Joyce Kilmer, who was, did you know this? A man. Alfred Joyce Kilmer, writer, editor, poet, sniper shot through the head at the Second Battle of the Marne. That's how quickly it happens. Say love, and death kicks in the door, ejecting spent shells as it reloads. Click, click. My old boyfriend's not dead, but his brother, who parked by the bridge with Susan St. Clair, is. 5 years of Lou Gehrig's disease, that's how slowly it happens. Love walks down the road, and death waits at the river. Love wakes in the morning, and death's in a car. And you're in the crosswalk, your mind on a bridge and a boy and a slow-moving river, thinking how poems of praise should be about love, but it's luck pulls you back. Luck and split-second timing. those two with their lassos of not yet, not yet. Say love, and death checks the chamber. Say death, and love drops his head in his hands. Say luck, and bow deeply to split-second timing. Say luck, we're alive, we have leisure for this. And Charles, you were mentioning, this one is a little bit different, but you were mentioning the kind of an ordinary event, an ordinary thing becoming extraordinary. And this was really did, but it did in fact start in one of my favorite ordinary places, which is the thrift store. This is a new poem, but I just thought I would toss that in here. Spell. Unlikely find in a thrift store's back bin, linen sheets that when washed and fitted to my bed felt so light I slept in them, as though I had become a gauzy net of spun flax, woven to so delicate a mesh that the weight of every woe that had befallen me had somehow fallen through me, dropped away from me magically, and none of it mattered. I tell you, this was fairy tale stuff. I had no ragged edges whip-stitched into worms, no scars, no patches, scorch marks, burns. I was part of everything apart from nothing. Yet when I woke afraid. Now what was I to do? Walk out into the world without my tragedies, without my griefs and grievances packed into the shadow I dragged as ballast behind me for years? Well, no need to worry. Spells don't last. They're beauties in their brevity. But sometimes I can conjure this one back when sheets are freshly washed and smoothed across the bed. I close my eyes, lie lightly in the weave, and for a moment, I become 1,000 sky blue blossoms floating in a field of flax, unthreshed, unbroken, and unspun.
Wow. Gorgeous.
Wow. And then I'll set up this, I did the poem that you talked about the train ticket. I'm going to read and I'll set it up. I don't read this that often because it's a little bit long, but this poem is in How to Wear This Body. And so it was written sometime after the 2016 election. And I was on a train and I had bought a newspaper to read on the train. And I was so infuriated by what I was reading in the paper that I just refused to read the paper. I put it down and I started reading my train ticket, which was one of those large paper train tickets at the time. So that's how this came about. It's called Changes to Your Itinerary May Affect Your Fate. That's what I read on my train ticket. But my ticket says fare, not fate. It says changes to your itinerary may affect your fare. But the ticket doesn't actually say anything. It isn't even a ticket. It's a barcode composed of light and dark patterns attached to 4 pages of wasted ink on wasted wood pulp, flattened and chemically bleached into blinding white paper sheets at the peril of our drinking water, outlining precisely how few legal rights I retain, specific to my journey by rail between Washington, D.C. and New York City today. A changeable day that started fogged in, began to burn off near the Susquehanna River, where the train takes flight above the water's wide shine, once represented with aluminum foil between 2 banks of green-dyed Play-Doh in my 4th grade geography project entitled Colonial Waterways, B+, try to be neater. As we cross the high trestle over yet another river that didn't lead to the fragrant spice markets of India, I see these ticket pages are filled with fat chunks of small fonted language, footnoted by stars, double stars, and crosses, outlining the rules for baggage, for our considerable baggage, what we carry with us, jammed into the overhead compartments or clogging the aisles, rules about money and stuff, but nothing about fate or its three badass goddesses who spin, measure, and cut out the length of a life, and nothing about what we drag behind us, freighted with denials of the past, like long cotton collecting bags pulled down dark rows by dark bodies. But even if it were about fate, even if I switch trains, I head to Pittsburgh on the Pennsylvanian, where the brass plaque at the confluence of the westward rolling Ohio River says Fort Pitt's capture from the French and Indians in 1758 established Anglo-Saxon supremacy in the United States. It's hard to misread Anglo-Saxon supremacy, no matter what direction one turns, none of which, including smallpox-infected blankets, is touched on in the fine print contained by this sheaf of papers masquerading as a ticket, which I know now has nothing to do with fate. Go ask Oedipus, Iphigenia, or the two men who survived the collapse of the World Trade Towers but died in the Staten Island ferry crash. Ask them about fate. I just read it that way because I am stupidly hopeful for answers. And I could have misread fair as fade or fame or face or hate, because changes to your itinerary may affect your face is also true, as is changes to your itinerary may affect your hate, a thing screaming from my newspaper this morning so hard that I read and then misread my ticket's disclaimer instead. I am trying to take heart. I am trying to take heart in the wrong words by turning them into the right ones, but it's not working. But I'm trying. I'm quieting down now, taking a cue from the lawyers in the wide, cushy seats of the first-class car, who know that it doesn't matter whether it's fair or fade or face or fate that changes to your itinerary may affect. All the business resides in the conditional case of the verb, packed tight with the power of maybe and might in the smart, snappy briefcase of may.
Oh, that's glorious.
Love
that.
But I'll jump to something shorter, but also because I love misreading things, and I love it when people have their bad translations of words. I think that's, or when people misunderstand things. And this was a gift from my husband when he told me this story, because he knew eventually I would have to put it into a poem. And the only thing to say about it is that if you grew up in a Christian tradition, you at some point as a child in Sunday school probably sang a song called Jesus Loves Me. But the rest is self-explanatory because my husband initially misunderstood the words. So this poem is called Jesus Loves Meat. That's what my husband sang at first grade Sunday school for several weeks before asking what the big deal was about meat and where in the Bible it told him so. He took his cues from the illustrated plates and figured lamb was a favorite dish of the Lord's, with dove a distant second. By the time he got straightened out on the subject by Daniel Detweiler's little brother, who had peed his pants laughing when Daniel upped the ante and told my husband Joseph was a wrinkled old man because the Bible says he tied his ass to a pole and walked a mile, Well, by that time, my husband was done with strict constructionism. And really, who wants to argue with that? That's just the best story, isn't it?
I love that.
So
Oh,
I also think poetry should be funny and entertaining, and we can tell
yeah.
each other our stories with it. So yeah, I just love that. And kids are so cruel to one another. But it's the best argument I have against strict constructionism of any text. So um let's see, how can I make a little segue out of that? It's hard to segue out of that when Charles. Um, oh, well, this is another hearkening back to childhood. Uh, this is a poem from Cartography of Home, and it's called Already. Already, this is not what you thought you would be reading. And honestly, it's not what I thought I would be writing. So quickly, I have to start again. Already, this is not what you thought you would be reading. And honestly, it's not what I thought I would be writing either. So quickly, everything turns with a thought or a word, and we become lost. But this makes us allies, companions in an unmapped landscape, like students moved mid-year to a new school. Now, there I've done it. Cue up the cafeteria humiliation reel, fire the cheeks' fierce burn, those red hot sparks poking holes in the tiny hope chests tucked inside our preteen hearts. And most of us are still packing some of that sorrow. Whatever story we thought this might unpack with its words has now slunk down at the loser table to foot funk level in its plastic seat with corroded chair legs. Or better yet, it turned tail and ran before even walking into the room like we wish we had done, instead of trying to sashay across the page in the wrong clothes, covered with the cheap perfume of fake it till you make it, like it's the kind of story that never sat alone at a table pretending it didn't want to die. But that story and that story's lie is long gone. So we begin again, each day. And look, whatever it was that we didn't think this would be has been taking shape beneath our noses the whole time, kneading its own dough, punching it down, letting it rise, checking the oven, and now warm brown loaves cool on a windowsill, like in an illustrated book of fairy tales, curls of steam lifting from their dark aromatic crusts, delicious, whole wheat, gluten-free, however you need it, bread to pass between us in a story we didn't even know would have a kitchen or a windowsill or a cupboard where you find butter and I find strawberry preserves, and where we sit down together, take out our hidden knives, use them to spread the butter, smooth the sweet jam, and share the bread. Oh, and this is not in the cartography book, but it's a little bit about finding home. So I realized I ought to bring it in. How to move in. Bring in the bed first, then the books. Then wait as long as possible before doing anything else. Go back to work, sweep out the old place, volunteer. Allow time for your books to adjust their spines in light of a different dust sifting the air, and the low, deep notes sounded by floor joists when no one's there. Let the books and the light in the room settle in. Let the bed be. Because the promise of sex is almost as good as sex and sometimes better, let's face it. So let the bed rest. The world remains packed with injustice, cockroaches, pottery shards, and improbable physics, all none of your choosing. So allow emptiness to work its little acre in your life. Then you'll be home. I'm looking at my time here.
You're good.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. I'll read the title poem from our cartography of home. My mother was a place. She was the where from which I rose. Once on my feet, I touched my forehead to her knee, then thigh, then hip, waist, shoulder, as I grew into my own wild country, borderless, then bordered, bound by terrors, terra incognita, and salt seas. I took my compass rose from her, my cardinal points, embodiments of wind and names of cloud, but every symbol in the legend now belongs to me. Rivers, topographic lines and shading, the back roads, city streets, the highway lanes that end abruptly at the broken edge of cliffs, where dragons snorting fire ride curls of waves in unknown seas. Monsters marked the desert blanks on her charts too. Before she died, I folded myself back to pocket size, my children tucked inside like inset maps, and I lay my head down on her lap. My mother stroked my hair the way her mother had stroked hers, and hers before hers, on, and we remained like that, not long, but long enough to make an atlas of us, perfect bound, while she was still a place, and so was I.
Wow. That is really a glorious, glorious poem. It's so moving. It really is. And how you connect the, the places to, that you're the repository of in that life and in that relationship is, and once again, you really accomplish it in a very compact amount of space. It's so beautiful, beautiful poem.
Well, thank you. But don't you find that you are all you are all the geography inside of you, all the different places? When I was thinking about this book, and as this book was coming together, the whole idea of the way we inhabit space and space inhabits us, and and the way that place works in our lives. It was it was really fun to spend that much time. Of course, it was also during the lockdown, so those ideas of place and home and what was interior and what was exterior, was really came to the fore, at least for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a poem, maybe two poems that I've written about the cellar of my house, which I spent a lot of time in, and it had so many objects, and it had what they call an octopus furnace, and which I used to always meddle with, and my grandmother tagged me because I did that, the little devil. and, and that,
Oh, not a bad name.
and I got tagged. But that for me, I mean, the cellar meant so much to me. There was so much there. Not to belabor it, but it
Oh,
was like
absolutely.
a universe for me of the things that were there that I could still reach out and touch if they were right there in front of me.
Exactly. Oh, exactly. So I think it's really the way that we, re-enter those lives, or we re-enter those places. It's wonderful.
So do you have another poem to
I
give?
do, and I will finish with a poem that's really a farm poem, but called "The Last of It," um, which has dogs in it, all kinds of animals in it. But you have to have a dog poem. This is called "The Last of It." Terriers are named for Earth. And this one was always head down in a groundhog hole, dirt flying past her back end like struck oil, until she'd flush a groundhog, run it, shake it cold, then leave it for the turkey vulture cleanup crew who travel in a crowd, death being food and fellowship. And who am I to judge the way they take turns at a corpse, lined up on a fence like it's the front porch of a country store? So the buzzards had done their bit, the maggots theirs, the beetles and bacteria, but terriers are named for Earth. So she went back to drag the last of it, a flattened throw rug now of spine and skull still sewn with sinew, blackened footpads holding curved, sharp claws, but not much else, up to the house where I came upon it, yelled, "Damn it," and threw it on the car roof so I could fling it roadside on a hard turn the next time I went out. Then, frankly, there's a big blank in the day. Yes, I was there, but I have no memory of it. Phone calls, laundry bills, I cleaned stuff up. Life took off in some direction and I trotted after it. So it was later when I drove my neighbor into town and braked hard coming down the quarry hill, that the carcass made its sudden reappearance, sliding down the windshield, bone sockets, teeth, and fur, claws screeching on the sloped glass, making resurrection and reanimation both seem possible. And yes, we screamed so hard, I drove into the ditch. And even though I threw the carcass down the gully, dropped my friend off, washed the car, I know, as well as any terrier, that eternal recurrence lives on through the earth, through the stories we tell. And I'm very sure I have not heard the last of it.
Wow. Wow. Hayden, thank you so much for this experience, the discussion, and to listen to you read your poems with such vigor. It's really a treat for our audience here and for myself. And I thank you again for being our guest. I
Well,
thank Ileana Pineda for all she does to make this a show on the technical side, and I very much appreciate all the work that Philly Cam puts into this. And I couldn't leave any of our shows without mentioning that this program is a reality because of Moonstone Arts, and it's a reality because of Larry Robin.
Here, here.
All that he does to what I call him, Larry is truly a cultural treasure of Philadelphia, and I'll keep using that term for him. So if you like this show and all the other things, that the readings that he does, the books that he publishes, the chapbooks, go to our website at moonstoneartcenter.org and see and make a contribution, make a donation to keep that alive. And we do 100 events in 1 year. We expose and give a platform to close to 300 poets every year. And it's not me, it's Larry, it's the other host of the other programs, etc., that makes this all happen. But it's really glorious for Philadelphia. And I don't think any place else, at least in this area and in the country, that does as much as Moonstone does to create the love of poetry. So thank you again, Hayden, for your time and for your poems and for your glorious books. And we hope to be in touch. Thank you again. We'll see you in April.